Name is Kevin Quiles Bonilla. I am a young brown boy with curly black hair, black eyeglasses, black headphones, a gray t-shirt, and behind me is a cream wall. And I'm coming to you from the Lenape land, also known as Manhattan. And I'm originally from the land of the Tainos, also known as Puerto Rico. The theme of resistance is inherently linked to my practice because I'm very focused on sort of speaking about the experience that I have within all the intersections that I inhabit. So I think the main overarching theme in my work comes from my experience as a Puerto Rican, and specifically the experience of living and being born and raised within a still colonial environment, and what it means to afterwards then be a part of the diaspora, and sort of what it means to sort of go back and forth between the mainland and the colony. But aside from that, and more specifically, I'm also concerned with how colonialism plays a vital role in the different intersections that I inhabit. So not only my identity as a Puerto Rican, but also my identity as a person with a disability, as a person of color, as a queer person, and as a person in the diaspora. So all of these are different identities that have been and are still to this day marginalized in many ways.
Image number 1. Installation view of While You Dried in the Sand. Photo by John Grew. In a photograph from above, a portion of a gray floor is covered with sand. Above the sand are custom printed wooden beach chairs. The left chair has a portable radio, with its antenna fully opened. Both chairs have small white towels at their top. Next to these chairs are three custom printed beach towels, and each contain images of specific moments from Puerto Rico's history. Image number 2. Detailed shot of While You Dried in the Sand. Photo by John Grew. Detailed image of two custom printed wooden beach chairs. The left chair has imagery of Puerto Rican protesters, and in quote unquote tropical font, the phrase reads, "as bad as a hurricane." The right chair has imagery of police during nighttime, and in quote unquote tropical font, a phrase reads, "the lights went out." Each chair has a small white towel at the top as headrests, and on the left chair, there is a portable radio. Image 3. While You Dried in the Sand. It Came Out of Nowhere. 2021. Custom print on beach towel. Dimensions 38.5 by 77 inches. A custom printed beach towel. In the background, a view of green mountains in Puerto Rico. On the foreground, an aerial view of houses with blue tarps after Hurricane Maria. On the bottom left, there's a couple of flowers, and on the top left, in multicolor and quote unquote tropical font, the phrase reads, "It came out of nowhere." Image 4. While You Dried in the Sand, The Wind Took Everything. 2021. Custom print on beach towel. Dimensions 38.5 by 77 inches. A custom printed beach towel. In the background, a black and white image of palms. On the foreground, a group of palm trees are destroyed after Hurricane Maria. On the top right, there's a flower and green leaves. And on the bottom right, in pink and quote unquote tropical font, the phrase reads, The wind took everything.
Well, I would definitely start by saying that I have had a non-apparent disability for most of my life. But I've also was born within a household with a family member, specifically my sister, who had a physical disability. And so I think the idea, the notion of what we had or what disability entailed was specifically focused on physicality. And so for a really long time, I never really considered my own experience with disability as a disability itself. So it really took for me to come to the context of New York and to start engaging with the disability community. One of my first interactions was through the invitation to a residency that still is existent. It's called the Art and Disability Residency. And it was a very formative and very revealing experience because it allowed me to sort of see that the lived experience that I had was also very much a disability in itself. And so I think I'm still very much coming into understanding disability aesthetics, not only within lived experience, but also within my own practice as an artist. Um, and then also aside from that, I'm also very interested. I think one of the questions that I still ask myself within my practice is how to consider colonialism itself as a type of disability that very specifically determines a way of thinking for a very specific marginalized group of people. And I've been thinking about that a lot, specifically after the passing of Hurricane Maria, which was a very it was a catalyst for the recent history of the island. It was a moment that while there was a natural disaster itself, I really do believe that the thing that caused the most damage was the aftermath and the treatment of Puerto Ricans, not only by the Puerto Rican government, but also by the US government. And it really sort of brought our our colonial experience back to the surface. So that's why one of the overarching themes also in my work is sort of exploring how does colonialism can also function as a type of disability that affects specifically a very specific group of people. Um, and with the work While You Dried in the Sand, is definitely a continuation of those explorations. I was very attracted um, to these tourist commodities, such as beach towels that are often sold in stores that are specifically made in the capital to attract tourists, so they can buy a souvenir while on their visit to the island. And often this commodities have this very specific iconographies, symbols, fonts, imagery that is very stereotypical of what they're expecting the island to be, and often, once again, has this very it essentially mutes the very intense and violent history of colonialism that the island has lived for hundreds of years. And so I decided to use that same language and appropriate it and see how can I sort of use it as a type of tapestry and sort of present that the different events that have sort of passed ever since the Hurricane Maria that have passed through the island. So I'm focusing on the hurricane itself, but then also focusing on the protests that happened on the island in the summer of 2019, when the islanders demanded the then governor, to step out of power because of their blatant corruption towards the island and its people, and then also making reference of the earthquakes that also happened in the winter of 2020, which further exacerbated the sort of the precarity of the island and its people. I sort of see my experience with the terminology of disability in this sort of two routes. The first route is sort of understanding my own experience with a neurodivergent disability and sort of understanding and thinking of it as a disability and not just focusing on physicality itself as a disability, or thinking of conditions that are specifically physical as a disability, but sort of expanding the notions myself about what disability entails. Explore is sort of this notion of how um, colonialism can also sort of uh, um, function as a type of disability, but not necessarily one that is that we're sort of, it's essentially one that is given to us by a specific power, and I think a lot about how we in some senses we lose power. For example, uh, Puerto Rico, we don't get to choose for the president of the United States, though he does have power in the different decisions that are made around the island. We do not have representation on the House of Senates, um, uh, though this is the group of people that make decisions for the outcomes of the island. So there's a lot of ways in which we do not have power. And so that's why I'm very interested in sort of expanding this idea of how can colonialism also function as a type of disability that has been uh, uh, that has been given to us by this specific structure of power that has dominance over the island. Yeah, this is a question that I constantly ask myself within my practice, because I am very focused on all the projects that I do to always make a reference of the different intersections that I inhabit. So I think in the beginning of my practice, I remember that I would very specifically try to separate each project according to sort of each intersection, which to me, obviously I was still coming into an understanding of my own identity and the work in relation to my identity, but it still did not feel like a very productive way of sort of producing, because um, it was almost like treating each identity within its own vacuum, and not um, and not experience it as we experience it within our lived experience, which is all of them sort of interact with each other. And I think that has been one of the main focuses on my practice ever since, to always be very conscious on the references that I'm making, and the iconographies that I'm using and the language that I'm using, and how to reference each of the intersections that I inhabit. So um, and I think that sort of presents itself in different ways according to the different mediums that I use. I think that it presents itself in a very specific way when I'm working within video or photography or installation, and then in a very different way when I'm working with performance. I often in my latest performances works, I've been working a lot with the material of the blue tarp, which has become a very iconographic object within a Puerto Rico post-Hurricane Maria. So just to give a little bit of context, which this was the material that was given to people that had damages in their houses after they lost sections of the house, whether it was a wall or a roof, after the hurricane. And it was meant to be this temporary solution that eventually became a long-term solution. Because still to this day, even after almost 4 years since the passing of the hurricanes, as you're descending the island, you can still see many houses with blue tarps. One example, but I think in the overall body of my work, I'm very focused on seeing and on using language and symbolism and iconographies that sort of appeal to all the different intersections that I inhabit. So not only thinking of myself as a Puerto Rican, but also as a queer person, and how does my queer identity interact with me as I go back and forth between the United States and Puerto Rico, which is two very different experiences, two very different queer experiences. Um, and also myself as a person with a disability, being in Puerto Rico, where for a really long time I never considered my non-apparent disability as a disability. And then coming to the United States, where I was able to engage with a community that was much more formed around these notions of disability, that it was able to expand my understanding of that thing.